Welcome back to Black Bear News, where we are discussing abrupt climate change, climate collapse, environmental destruction at a ever-increasing rate. And the evidence just keeps on rolling in. Thank you guys for continuing to send me articles and for continuing to add your very insightful comments. I appreciate you. I'm going to start off with an article that Robin Data sent me. Thank you, Robin, for continuing to send all the stuff that you're sending to me. I do look at it, even if I don't get a chance to read it. This is fairly amazing. Excuse me. And this is from The Guardian. What is the date on this? Oh, March 5th. From Damian Carrington, the environment editor. Mass die-off of sea creatures follows freezing UK weather. Massive numbers of starfish, crab, mussels, and lobsters have been washed up on the North Sea coast of the UK. Following the recent freezing weather and storms, tens of thousands of creatures are piled up ankle deep in places along the Holderness coast in Yorkshire, and similar mass mortality has been reported in Kent and Norfolk. There was a 3°C drop in sea temperature last week, which will have caused animals to hunker down and reduce their activity levels. This is insane. There's like a picture here of just animals piled up on a shore. There was a 3°C drop in sea temperature last week, which will have caused animals to hunker down and reduce their activity levels, said Bex Lynham from the Yorkshire Wildlife Trust. This makes them vulnerable to rough seas. They become dislodged by large waves and washed ashore when the rough weather kicked in. The casualties are mostly invertebrates, though some fish were also found. Larger animals such as dolphins are more mobile and can save themselves by swimming away when this sort of thing happens, said Lynham. All the organisms piled up on the shores were dead, except for some of the lobsters. Yorkshire Wildlife Trust team worked alongside local fishermen to rescue the surviving lobsters, collecting them in buckets and taking them to tanks in Bridlington. The aim is to put them back in the sea when the weather improves. Lynham said, "This area is very important for shellfish, and we work alongside fishermen to promote sustainable fisheries and protect reproductive stocks. It's worth saving them so they can be put back into the sea and continue to breed." Large numbers of dead animals were also found at the Norfolk Wildlife Trust Home Dunes Reserve near Hunstanton. Local warden Gary Hibbard said he had seen crabs, squat lobsters, starfish, sea anemones, sea cucumbers, sunstars, and whelks. Dr. Lisa Beatty, Senior Living Seas Officer at the Wildlife Trust, said, "We can't prevent natural disasters like this, natural, quote unquote, but we can mitigate against declining marine life and the problems that humans cause by creating enough protected areas at sea and by ensuring that these sites are large enough and close enough to offer fish, crustaceans, dolphins, and other marine life the protection they require to withstand natural events such as this." Holderness inshore waters are already designated as a marine conservation zone, and the government is due to announce a consultation into more MCZs this year. However, an £8 million government consultation proposed 127 sites in 2011. Only 50 of which have been designated so far. The most recent designations in 2016 stretched from the coast of Northumberland down to Land's End and included Europe's longest chalk reef off Cromer in Norfolk. The 50 MCZs, along with other types of protected areas, now cover 20% of all English waters, almost 8,000 square miles. The MCZs have also been also criticized as useless paper parks that offer no real protection from the dredging and trawling that has devastated large areas of England's seas for decades. The MCZs, they have no management at all, so life within them remains unprotected, said Professor Callum Roberts at the University of York and one of UK's leading marine conservation experts. They will be worse than useless, giving the illusion of protection where none is present. That is good to know and very interesting indeed. Crazy. We also had the same kind of die-offs happening when the polar vortex hit like Florida and Alabama in the US just a couple months ago, right? This is not good. Weather extremes, killing animals and plant life. Sound the alarm. This is from the Daily Cost. Sound the alarm, 66% of the world will have severely limited access to water in just 7 years, by G.C. Howard, Sunday, March 4th, 2018. South Africa is in its death throes as the worst drought in the country's recorded history is plaguing the Rainbow Nation. For the past few years, climate scientists have been issuing dire warnings. Day zero is approaching and fast. The city is edging closer to a day known locally as Day Zero. When supplies are so low, authorities will have to cut off the water to 3/4 of the population. Far from being a hypothetical scenario, Day Zero has a set date. It is currently expected on July 9th. The perfect storm of conditions that led to this drought, specifically 3 consecutive years of extremely low rainfall, would generally be expected no more than once in a millennium. Day Zero is the nickname given to the date when the city of Cape Town, South Africa is expected to be the first in the world to run out of water. And what's even worse, the United Nations has made a statement claiming that this will happen to 2/3 of the globe by the year 2025. Whoa. Whoa. That's, I'm saying whoa because they actually put like a realistic date on this, and that statistic is amazing. And scary. That's not very long from now. According to the UN, climate change, population growth, and consumption will likely result in 2/3 of the entire global population facing a lack of sufficient water resources by 2025. In 2014, the UN issued a terrifying summary of the then planet's water scarcity. 20% of the global population was already experiencing potable fluid shortages. Water scarcity already affects every continent. Around 1.2 billion people, or almost 1/5 of the world's population, live in areas of physical scarcity, and 500 million people are approaching this situation. Another 1.6 billion people, or almost 1/4 of the world's population, face economic water shortage, where countries lack the necessary infrastructure to take water from rivers and aquifers. And water scarcity is among the main problems to be faced by many societies in the world in the 21st century, the XXI century. Water use has been growing at more than twice the rate of population increase in the last century. And although there is no global water scarcity as such, an increasing number of regions are chronically short of water. Water scarcity is both a natural and a human-made phenomenon. There's enough fresh water on the planet for 7 billion people, but it is distributed unevenly, and too much of it is wasted, polluted, and unsustainably managed. In just a few years since that article was written, the projection has increased to 66% of the global population within 7 years, and the water has become even more unsustainable and polluted. A microscopic plastic-filled garbage patch the size of Mexico was discovered recently in the Pacific Ocean. A new discovery of a massive amount of plastic floating in the South Pacific is yet another piece of bad news in the fight against ocean plastic pollution. This patch was recently discovered by Captain Charles Moore, founder of the Algalita Research Foundation, a nonprofit group dedicated to solving the issue of marine plastic pollution. Moore, who was the first one to discover the famed North Pacific garbage patch in 1997, estimates this zone of plastic pollution could be upward of 1 million square miles in size. Coral bleaching is occurring at such a rapid pace that most scientists think it's impossible to reverse, resulting in extremely toxic water. The Great Barrier Reef will suffer irreversible damage by 2030. Unless radical action is taken to lower carbon emissions, a stark new report has warned. Unless temperatures are kept below the internationally agreed limit of 2°C warming on pre-industrial levels, the reef will cease to be a coral-dominated ecosystem, the report warns. Coral bleaching, which occurs when water becomes too warm and coral's energy source is decimated, is now a serious threat to the reef, having not been documented in the region prior to 1979. The increase in carbon dioxide pumped into the atmosphere, 90% of which is absorbed by the oceans, has already caused a 30% rise in the hydrogen ions that cause ocean acidification. This process hinders the ability of corals to produce the skeletal building blocks of reefs. And plastics littering our oceans are bringing up the risk of infectious disease for the reefs and the animals who swim in them. Over 4 years, the team analyzed more than 124,000 corals spanning 159 reefs in 4 countries, Myanmar, Thailand, Indonesia, and Australia, and they found that under the normal circumstances, just 4% of corals are afflicted. Under normal circumstances, just 4% of corals are afflicted by some kind of disease, but the infections strike down 89% of corals that come into contact with plastic. I didn't think we would be the ones to write this study, said Lamb, because other scientists have already done so much research on plastic pollution. They've estimated that 5 trillion tiny pieces of plastic float in the seas. They've shown that some get swallowed by seabirds because it smells like food. They've documented plastic waste on the shores of the world's remotest islands. But to Lamb's surprise, no one had really estimated the extent of plastic junk on coral reefs or studied how that junk relates to disease. Indeed, when people think about the many ills befalling reefs, rising temperatures, acidifying waters, overfishing, nutrient pollution, ravenous starfish, plastic rarely gets a mention. Worse still, plastic-induced ailments disproportionately affect the corals that provide important habitats for fish, the ones that create intricate branches and layers. That same architectural complexity becomes easily filled and entwined with plastic. So these corals are 8 times more likely to be diseased than simpler ones with rounded shapes. Our cause for concern should be great. It's easy to talk about the problem, but it's time we start protesting the problem. We are comfortable protesting for everything else that affects our lives: guns, tax cuts, women's rights, nuclear proliferation, and politicians we hate. Now we need to have a unified front that protests for the health, protests for the health of our environment. Before we don't have a recognizable, safe environment left. We are on an apocalyptic precipice, and the prognosis is not a good one. Indeed, very true. All the political intrigue and all of the issues that people are concerned about are just children playing in a sandbox while the entire playground is on fire due to climate change. And these motherfuckers think the sandbox is important. I mean, as interested as I am in political doings and ongoings, and, you know, I guess it's important on some sense. I don't know. I mean, I don't know the upshot of, you know, the only way to really, truly look at politics, or what, you know, the shape of politics or the impact of politics, what that is and what we need to do about it, is to demolish it as it is known, as it now exists, and to resurrect, you know, some kind of politics that actually takes into its equation and into understanding that our main focus, our main purpose as human beings on this planet right now, today, is to somehow overcome the predicament that we have, the quandary that we've put ourselves in. That is the one and only thing that anybody should be concerned about on this planet at all. I mean, and all human rights and all social justice causes are part of that problem, are part of fixing that problem. But they are subordinate to that problem, because if we don't have a planet to live on, if we don't have air to breathe, it doesn't fucking matter. It doesn't fucking matter. Anything else doesn't matter. It doesn't matter whether you're a Democrat or a conservative, or whether Donald Trump is evil or Hillary Clinton is evil, or whether anybody's rights are being respected or disrespected, or the rise of the surveillance state, or the whatever it is. It doesn't fucking matter. None of this shit fucking matters, because if we are dead, we are dead. So we need to, if we are going to have a real political movement of any kind on any space in this planet, on this world, on this planet, it's got to be something that puts environmental concerns at the top of the hierarchy, and everything else will trickle down from that. But all that shit's going to have to be dealt with later, because dealing with it now is a death sentence. And all of that may not matter anyways, because this is where we are. This is from Arctic News. March 3rd, 2018. Warning signs. Big graphic here. Danger, signs of extinction. The Arctic is warming up more than twice as fast as the rest of the world due to numerous feedbacks. At times, large areas over the Arctic Ocean can become 30 C or 54 Fahrenheit warmer than 1979 to 2000, as illustrated by the image below. On February 27th, 2018, large parts of the Arctic Ocean north of Greenland had turned into open water, as illustrated by the image below. Yet while the situation in the Arctic is desperate, with sea ice north of Greenland collapsing and more, mainstream media do not seem to care. If there ever were warning signs of what could eventuate, this is one. The sea ice north of Greenland is typically the thickest, as it is the least affected by melting and can build over many years. Early February 2018, sea ice north of Greenland was up to 5 meters thick. To see sea ice this thick getting pushed away and open water emerging north of Greenland in the middle of winter is simply stunning. For years, I've been warning about the situation in the Arctic, in particular the open doors feedback, which is accelerating Arctic warming. Such feedbacks were taken into consideration in an earlier analysis that warned about a potential 1.6 C warming globally due to albedo changes in the Arctic, in combination with associated changes such as loss of the ice buffer, latent heat, more heat transfer from the Atlantic Ocean to the Arctic Ocean due to stronger winds along the path of the Gulf Stream, and more heat entering the atmosphere or remaining in the atmosphere due to more open water in the Arctic Ocean. And as oceans get more stratified and take up less heat from the atmosphere, so the current situation doesn't come as a big surprise, but it's stunning to see sea ice collapse north of Greenland in the winter. Back in March 7, 2007, I posted the article 10 Dangers of Global Warming, describing events getting progressively worse, with one danger feeding and reinforcing the next one, culminating in panic. Then I thought that reading that post could at least help people better understand what's going on and thus help people avoid panicking. But right now, I wonder whether most people do want to understand it at all. Anyway, here are some images and words describing what happened over the past few days. As Arctic warming keeps accelerating, there's even less temperature difference between the North Pole and the equator, and this slows down the speed at which jet stream circumnavigates Earth. The jet stream. The jet stream is getting more wavy, and a more wavy jet stream makes it easier for cold air to move out of the Arctic. So this open doors feedback is a self-reinforcing feedback that further accelerates warming in the Arctic. During the northern winter, the Arctic is increasingly getting warmer than North America, Europe, and Siberia. This increases the temperature difference between these continents and the oceans, which at times, is causing winds to strongly speed up over the North Atlantic and the North Pacific, making an already waving jet stream extend even further over the Arctic Ocean, reaching areas well beyond the North Pole. The North Pole was above freezing temperature February 25th. As the jet stream makes the detour, a huge amount of heat enters the Arctic from the south. These events were preceded by the polar vortex splitting up. On February 9th, 2018, the polar vortex was split into 4 vortices and reached speeds as fast as 425 kilometers or 264 miles per hour. Yeah, a sudden stratospheric warming event occurred on February 16th, 2018, with temperatures reaching as high as 47.9 Fahrenheit over Hudson Bay. In there were winds over the Yukon territory as fast as 204 miles per hour. And then there were temperature low anomalies. There was temperatures over the Pacific as low as negative 69.1 C. Temperatures over the Atlantic as low as negative 69.8 C, or close to negative 100 Fahrenheit in those places. Arctic sea ice extent was at a record low for the time of year on February 26th, 2018, at 14.15 million kilometers. Arctic sea ice extent typically reaches its maximum in March. The maximum extent in 1991 to 2000 was reached on February 24th. So there is a chance that Arctic sea ice extent will go all downhill from now on this year. Zero sea ice volume is within the margins of the trend depicted on the image above on the right. Decline of the snow and ice cover in the Arctic comes with a huge loss in albedo, which means that huge amounts of sunlight that were previously reflected back into space instead get absorbed by the Arctic. Loss of sea ice also means loss of the buffer that until now has consumed huge amounts of heat. Excuse me. The danger is that a sudden influx of heat can no longer be absorbed by the sea ice and will instead warm up sediments at the seafloor of the Arctic Ocean that can contain huge quantities of methane in the form of hydrates and free gas. Destabilization of hydrates can occur in a relatively small area as a result of relatively small temperature rise. Destabilization comes with a 160 times expansion in volume of the methane, which will send out shock waves that can destabilize nearby hydrates, causing them to destabilize as well, resulting in an eruption of huge quantities of methane over a large area. Here's another warning sign. Peak sea surface temperatures near Svalbard, and was it Tori that was telling me about this? Peak sea surface temperature near Svalbard rose from 12.4 C or 55.4 Fahrenheit on February 23rd to 15.6 C or 60 degrees Fahrenheit on March 2nd, 2018, as illustrated by the red line on the image on the right, with the blue line showing the 1981 to 2011 average. The 1981 to 2011 average was at 35 35 degrees Fahrenheit. And it's shooting up over 60 degrees Fahrenheit. That's warm for Svalbard in February. Here's another warning sign. High methane releases follow this chain of events on February 27th, 2018, likely originating from the seafloor of the East Siberian Arctic Shelf. On March 1st, 2018, methane levels as high as 3,087 were recorded. Note the solid magenta-colored areas over the ESAS on the image below. Excuse me. The image below with measurements by another satellite shows that methane levels were again very high over the ESAS the next day, i.e. March 2nd, 2018, confirming earlier indications that this is where the very high methane releases did occur. As the image below shows, methane levels on March 4th, 2018 were still very high as 2,964 parts per billion. An earlier analysis calculated that seafloor methane could cause a warming of 1.1 C within 1 decade, given a possible additional warming of 2.7 C due to just 2 elements, i.e. Arctic albedo changes and associated changes, and seafloor methane. Further warming of 2.1 C due to extra water vapor in the warmer atmosphere does seem well possible within a decade. Add up the impact of all warming events of this analysis, and the rise in mean global temperatures from pre-industrial could be more than 10 C within 1 decade, as illustrated by the image below. These are predictions that Sam Corona has made before. A rise of a few degrees Celsius would be devastating, especially when considering that the speed at which such a rise could occur leaves little or no time for plants and animals to adapt, let alone in case of a 10 C rise. Very dire indeed. And lastly, to ice this wonderful cake that we've been checking out tonight, from Truth Out, the U.S. is poised to become world's top fossil fuel producer. By Mike Ludwig, March 6th, 2018. The United States is poised to become the world's top oil producer and may dominate fossil fuel production globally in the coming decades, thanks in part to the rise of fracking, which has unlocked deep reserves and sparked environmental controversies across the country. By 2023, the U.S. is expected to top competitors like Russia and Saudi Arabia, according to a report released Monday by the International Energy Agency. Under this projection, the country would produce 17 million barrels of raw liquid hydrocarbons a day, up from 13 million in 2017. In fact, the U.S. alone is expected to meet 80% of new demand for oil globally by 2023. Growing output in Brazil, Canada, and Norway could satisfy the rest, because it must be satisfied, the thirst. Oil. The United States is poised to become the undisputed oil and gas producer in the world over the next several decades. IEA Executive Director Fatih Birol told the Senate Committee of Energy and Natural Resources in January, adding that by 2040, U.S. will be producing 50% more oil and gas than any country has ever managed to pull from the ground. Yay! Last year, OPEC countries agreed to combat falling prices by slowing oil production, putting a dent in global output. However, in the U.S., horizontal drilling, hydraulic fracturing, or fracking, and other new technologies have fueled an oil and gas boom across fields in Texas, Oklahoma, North Dakota, Pennsylvania, and beyond. This trend has shifted the U.S. from a major oil importer to a top producer and exporter over the past 2 decades. The domestic energy boom comes with plenty of controversy. Fracking has divided close-knit rural communities. Activists across the country are opposing new oil and gas pipelines, that they say threaten sensitive ecosystems and promise to feed an economy dependent on fossil fuels. Yeah. Toxic pollution from oil refineries, petrochemical plants, and natural gas processing sites sully the air in nearby communities, which are most often home to low-income people and people of color. For example, in 2017, more than 1 million Black Americans lived within 1/2 of a mile from an oil and gas facility, and that number grows every year. According to a report by the NAACP and the Clean Air Task Force, about 6.1 million Americans of all backgrounds live within 3 miles of one oil refinery or more. Refineries are known to belch toxic pollutants such as benzene, which has been linked to cancer and birth defects. In 2016, the Standing Rock Sioux sparked an international resistance movement against the Dakota Access Pipeline, an oil pipeline that tribal activists said threatens sacred sites and drinking water. The pipeline carries crude oil from vast fields in North Dakota to Texas, where it can be distributed to 2 refineries, petrochemical plants, and export terminals across the Gulf South. The impact to both people's lives and the things they depend on in the environment, whether it's water or land, is just going to continue to grow and grow. Bruce Beisel, the Energy Program Director at Earthworks, an environmental group focused on fossil fuels, told Truth Out. Climate disruption caused by carbon pollution is also a top concern, particularly among less conservative voters. Carbon emissions from natural gas are expected to steadily rise over the next 30 years, according to the Energy Information Administration. Advances in renewable energy and vehicle efficiency may reduce domestic carbon emissions from oil over the next 15 years, but they will begin increasing again by 2035. To curb fossil fuel consumption and pollution, environmentalists are increasingly opposing the construction of new oil and gas infrastructure, with the resistance camp at Standing Rock being one of the most famous examples. However, Brigham McGowan, the former chief operating officer of the Pipelines and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration and a transition advisor for the Trump administration, told Truth Out that he believes new infrastructure is necessary to support the current economy. Say what? Yes, we need to modernize our existing infrastructure, but we are getting oil and gas from places that we have not traditionally sourced these materials from. And so that requires new infrastructure, McCown said. I, like everyone else, want to be on renewables, but I think we need to be realistic about the amount of time that fossil fuels are going to be servicing our various industries. They spelled our, A-R-E. McCown said that even by conservative estimates, the U.S. economy would still be fossil fuel dependent by 2030 or 2040. However, Beisel said there's no room for complacency. Booming oil production in the U.S. will have an immediate impact on climate, public health, and environment. Increasingly, that stuff flowing in those pipelines will be exported or will be used for the plastics that will end up in the ocean and are becoming a problem without a whole lot of solutions at the moment, Beisel said. To keep the oil pumping despite increasing interest in the cleaner cars and renewables, the industry is shifting its focus toward petrochemical manufacturing, largely to make plastic products. The petrochemical industry will account for 25% of new demand for oil by 2023, according to the IEA. Companies like ExxonMobil and Chevron are expanding petrochemical production in the U.S., particularly along the Gulf South, where they need more petrochemical production, of course. As Truth Out has reported, plastics pollution is increasingly becoming a high-profile environmental problem, particularly in the ocean, where plastic bits known as microplastics are harming sea creatures as they move up the food chain. If current consumption trends continue, the amount of plastic in the world's ocean will outweigh the entire mass of fish still living in them. Pipeline dangers, with 2.6 million miles of oil and gas pipelines crisscrossing the U.S. and hundreds of facilities handling dangerous petrochemicals every day. Safety will also be an issue for the world's fossil fuel leader. Watchdogs warn that the regulatory agencies in charge of chemical and pipeline safety are notoriously underfunded and ineffective. Since 2013, more than 600 major pipeline accidents were reported to federal authorities each year. And dangerous chemical accidents are quite common across the nation's industrial corridors. As a former top official at PHMSA, the federal agency that regulates oil and gas pipelines, McCown acknowledged that the agency has suffered from serious mismanagement in recent years when well-meaning employees and pipeline inspectors were pulled away from doing critical work for the agency. He said PHMSA is now under new management and Congress has allocated money to hire more inspectors, and now the agency is in a robust position. He added that pipelines remain the safest method for transporting fossil fuels. Oh, really? Sure. However, Bizel said his organization works with citizen groups and activists to monitor pipelines and oil and gas facilities because there are still not enough government inspectors to do the job. It's a farce that there is any kind of inspection going on. There's none. You are on your own, Bizel said. And the hits just keep on coming. Yeah, if we're gonna treat climate change or the destruction of our environment as it should be treated, which is the very top problem facing humankind. Maybe running a close second is his nuclear Armageddon. If we're gonna treat it as such, we're gonna have to, all of us, realize one and all what a problem it is, and that's why I'm doing this channel, because if you don't understand the enormity of the problem facing us, then you can't be moved to action. You can't be moved to change your ways. You can only continue being part of the problem. And we are all part of the problem. So, first step is to recognize that you have a problem. First step for any addict getting sober. First step for any species looking to save itself from its destructive ways. Realize that there is a problem. There is a definite problem. Conservatives, pull your fucking heads out of your fucking asses, you stupid fuckers. This is a problem. You cannot continue to destroy the earth. Liberals, Democrats, pull your heads out of your fucking asses. You cannot continue to destroy the earth. You cannot continue to make movies. You can't continue to fucking make TV shows. You can't continue to build Starbucks. You can't continue to build electric cars. You cannot continue to build solar panels. You cannot continue to do all the things that you think are helpful but are actually not at all helpful. You can't continue to do those things. We have to, everyone as one, pull our heads out of our collective asses and realize that the way forward must be very, very, very different from what we think it should be or might be. That means, most of you know what it means, but that means, stop using all the things that you're using. Stop buying all the things that you're buying. Start growing your own food. Start collecting your own water. Start figuring out how to live without all of this stuff. It is the only way. Thank you once again for your eyes, your ears, and your conscience. I will hope to be back tomorrow with another video. Until next time, peace.